elders, whereof he was a member, had advertised but a few days before, that in consequence of certain unseemly interruptions which their worship had received from strangers, their chapel was closed to the public for the space of 1 year. As nothing was to be urged in opposition to this reasonable arrangement, we requested leave to make some trifling purchases of Shaker goods, which was grimly conceded. We accordingly repaired to a store in the same house and on the opposite side of the passage, where the stock was presided over by something alive in a russet case, which the elder said was a woman, and which I suppose was a woman, though I should not have suspected it. On the opposite side of the road was their place of worship, a cool, clean edifice of wood, with large windows and green blinds, like a spacious summer house. As there was no getting into this place, and nothing was to be done but walk up and down, and look at it and the other buildings in the village, which were chiefly of wood, painted a dark red like English barns, and composed of many stories like English factories, I have nothing to communicate to the reader, beyond the scanty results I gleaned the while our purchases were making. These people are called Shakers from their peculiar form of adoration, which consists of a dance, performed by the men and women of all ages, who arrange themselves for that purpose in opposite parties, the men first divesting themselves of their hats and coats, which they gravely hang against the wall before they begin, and tying a ribbon round their shirt sleeves, as though they were going to be bled. They accompany themselves with a droning, humming noise, and dance until they are quite exhausted, alternately advancing and retiring in a preposterous sort of trot. The effect is said to be unspeakably absurd, and if I may judge from a print of this ceremony which I have in my possession, and which I am informed by those who have visited the chapel, is perfectly accurate, it must be infinitely grotesque. They are governed by a woman, and her rule is understood to be absolute, though she has the assistance of a council of elders. She lives, it is said, in strict seclusion, in certain rooms above the chapel, and is never shown to profane eyes. If she at all resemble the lady who presided over the store, it is a great charity to keep her as close as possible, and I cannot too strongly express my perfect concurrence in this benevolent proceeding. All the possessions and revenues of the settlement are thrown into a common stock, which is managed by the elders. As they have made converts among people who were well-to-do in the world, and are frugal and thrifty, it is understood that this fund prospers, the more especially as they have made large purchases of land. Nor is this at Lebanon the only Shaker settlement. There are, I think, at least, 3 others. They are good farmers, and all their produce is eagerly purchased and highly esteemed. Shaker seeds, Shaker herbs and Shaker distilled waters are commonly announced for sale in the shops of towns and cities. They are good breeders of cattle, and are kind and merciful to the brute creation. Consequently, Shaker beasts seldom fail to find a ready market. They eat and drink together, after the Spartan model, at a great public table. There is no union of the sexes, and every Shaker, male and female, is devoted to a life of celibacy. Rumor has been busy upon this theme, but here again I must refer to the lady of the store, and say, that if many of the sister Shakers resemble her, I treat all such slander as bearing on its face the strongest marks of wild improbability. But that they take as proselytes persons so young that they cannot know their own minds, and cannot possess much strength of resolution in this or any other respect, I can assert from my own observation of the extreme juvenility of certain youthful Shakers whom I saw at work among the party on the road. They are said to be good drivers of bargains, but to be honest and just in their transactions, and even in horse dealing to resist those thievish tendencies which would seem, for some undiscovered reason, to be almost inseparable from that branch of traffic. In all matters they hold their own course quietly, live in their gloomy, silent commonwealth, and show little desire to interfere with other people. This is well enough, but nevertheless I cannot, I confess, incline towards the Shakers, view them with much favor, or extend towards them any very lenient construction. I so abhor, and from my soul detest that bad spirit, no matter by what class or sect it may be entertained, which would strip life of its healthful graces, rob youth of its innocent pleasures, pluck from maturity and age their pleasant ornaments, and make existence but a narrow path towards the grave, that odious spirit which, if it could have had full scope and sway upon the earth, must have blasted and made barren the imaginations of the greatest men, and left them, in their power of raising up enduring images before their fellow creatures yet unborn, no better than the beasts, that, in these very broad-brimmed hats and very somber coats, in stiff-necked, solemn-visaged piety, in short, no matter what its garb, whether it have cropped hair as in a Shaker village, or long nails as in a Hindu temple, I recognize the worst among the enemies of heaven and earth, who turn the water at the marriage feasts of this poor world, not into wine, but gall. And if there must be people vowed to crush the harmless fancies and the love of innocent delights and gaieties, which are a part of human nature, as much a part of it as any other love or hope that is our common portion, let them, for me, stand openly revealed among the ribald and licentious. The very idiots know that they are not on the immortal road, and will despise them, and avoid them readily. Leaving the Shaker village with a hearty dislike of the old Shakers, and a hearty pity for the young ones, tempered by the strong probability of their running away as they grow older and wiser, which they not uncommonly do, we returned to Lebanon, and so to Hudson, by the way we had come upon the previous day. There, we took the steamboat down the North River towards New York, but stopped, some 4 hours' journey short of it, at West Point, where we remained that night, and all next day, and next night too. In this beautiful place, the fairest among the fair and lovely highlands of the North River, shut in by deep green heights and ruined forts, and looking down upon the distant town of Newburgh, along a glittering path of sunlit water, with here and there a skiff, whose white sail often bends on some new tack as sudden flaws of wind come down upon her from the gullies in the hills, hemmed in, besides, all round with memories of Washington, and events of the Revolutionary War, is the military school of America. It could not stand on more appropriate ground, and any ground more beautiful can hardly be. The course of education is severe, but well devised, and manly. Through June, July, and August, the young men encamp upon the spacious plain whereon the college stands, and all the year their military exercises are performed there, daily. The term of study at this institution, which the state requires from all cadets, is 4 years, but, whether it be from the rigid nature of the discipline, or the national impatience of restraint, or both causes combined, not more than half the number who begin their studies here, ever remain to finish them. The number of cadets being about equal to that of the members of Congress, one is sent here from every congressional district, its member influencing the selection. Commissions in the service are distributed on the same principle. The dwellings of the various professors are beautifully situated, and there is a most excellent hotel for strangers, though it has the 2 drawbacks of being a total abstinence house, wines and spirits being forbidden to the students, and of serving the public meals at rather uncomfortable hours, to wit, breakfast at 7, dinner at 1, and supper at sunset. The beauty and freshness of this calm retreat, in the very dawn and greenness of summer, it was then the beginning of June, were exquisite indeed. Leaving it upon the 6th, and returning to New York, to embark for England on the succeeding day, I was glad to think that among the last memorable beauties which had glided past us, and softened in the bright perspective, were those whose pictures, traced by no common hand, are fresh in most men's minds, not easily to grow old, or fade beneath the dust of time, the Catskill Mountains, Sleepy Hollow, and the Tappan Zee. Chapter 16. The passage home. I never had so much interest before, and very likely I shall never have so much interest again, in the state of the wind, as on the long-looked-for morning of Tuesday the 7th of June. Some nautical authority had told me a day or 2 previous, anything with west in it, will do, so when I darted out of bed at daylight, and throwing up the window, was saluted by a lively breeze from the northwest which had sprung up in the night, it came upon me so freshly, rustling with so many happy associations, that I conceived upon the spot a special regard for all airs blowing from that quarter of the compass, which I shall cherish, I dare say, until my own wind has breathed its last frail puff, and withdrawn itself forever from the mortal calendar. The pilot had not been slow to take advantage of this favorable weather, and the ship which yesterday had been in such a crowded dock that she might have retired from trade for good and all, for any chance she seemed to have of going to sea, was now full 16 miles away. A gallant sight she was, when we, fast gaining on her in a steamboat, saw her in the distance riding at anchor, her tall masts pointing up in graceful lines against the sky, and every rope and spar expressed in delicate and thread-like outline. Gallant, too, when, we being all aboard, the anchor came up to the sturdy chorus cheerily men, oh cheerily, and she followed proudly in the towing steamboat's wake. But bravest and most gallant of all, when the tow rope being cast adrift, the canvas fluttered from her masts, and spreading her white wings she soared away upon her free and solitary course. In the after cabin we were only 15 passengers in all, and the greater part were from Canada, where some of us had known each other. The night was rough and squally, so were the next 2 days, but they flew by quickly, and we were soon as cheerful and snug a party, with an honest, manly-hearted captain at our head, as ever came to the resolution of being mutually agreeable, on land or water. We breakfasted at 8, lunched at 12, dined at 3, and took our tea at 7:30. We had abundance of amusements, and dinner was not the least among them, firstly, for its own sake, secondly, because of its extraordinary length, its duration, inclusive of all the long pauses between the courses, being seldom less than 2 hours and a half, which was a subject of never-failing entertainment. By way of beguiling the tediousness of these banquets, a select association was formed at the lower end of the table, below the mast, to whose distinguished president modesty forbids me to make any further allusion, which, being a very hilarious and jovial institution, was, prejudice apart, in high favor with the rest of the community, and particularly with a black steward, who lived for 3 weeks in a broad grin at the marvelous humor of these incorporated worthies. Then, we had chess for those who played it, whist, cribbage, books, backgammon, and shuffleboard. In all weathers, fair or foul, calm or windy, we were every one on deck, walking up and down in pairs, lying in the boats, leaning over the side, or chatting in a lazy group together. We had no lack of music, for one played the accordion, another the violin, and another, who usually began at 6 a.m., the key bugle, the combined effect of which instruments, when they all played different tunes in different parts of the ship, at the same time, and within hearing of each other, as they sometimes did, everybody being intensely satisfied with his own performance, was sublimely hideous. When all these means of entertainment failed, a sail would heave in sight, looming, perhaps, the very spirit of a ship, in the misty distance, or passing us so close that through our glasses we could see the people on her decks, and easily make out her name, and whither she was bound. For hours together we could watch the dolphins and porpoises as they rolled and leaped and dived around the vessel, or those small creatures ever on the wing, the Mother Carey's chickens, which had borne us company from New York Bay, and for a whole fortnight fluttered about the vessel's stern. For some days we had a dead calm, or very light winds, during which the crew amused themselves with fishing, and hooked an unlucky dolphin, who expired, in all his rainbow colors, on the deck, an event of such importance in our barren calendar, that afterwards we dated from the dolphin, and made the day on which he died, an era. Besides all this, when we were 5 or 6 days out, there began to be much talk of icebergs, of which wandering islands an unusual number had been seen by the vessels that had come into New York a day or two before we left that port, and of whose dangerous neighborhood we were warned by the sudden coldness of the weather, and the sinking of the mercury in the barometer. While these tokens lasted, a double lookout was kept, and many dismal tales were whispered after dark, of ships that had struck upon the ice and gone down in the night, but the wind obliging us to hold a southward course, we saw none of them, and the weather soon grew bright and warm again. The observation every day at noon, and the subsequent working of the vessel's course, was, as may be supposed, a feature in our lives of paramount importance, nor were there wanting, as there never are, sagacious doubters of the captain's calculations, who, so soon as his back was turned, would, in the absence of compasses, measure the chart with bits of string, and ends of pocket handkerchiefs, and points of snuffers, and clearly prove him to be wrong by an odd 1,000 miles or so. It was very edifying to see these unbelievers shake their heads and frown, and hear them hold forth strongly upon navigation, not that they knew anything about it, but that they always mistrusted the captain in calm weather, or when the wind was adverse. Indeed, the mercury itself is not so variable as this class of passengers, whom you will see, when the ship is going nobly through the water, quite pale with admiration, swearing that the captain beats all captains ever known, and even hinting at subscriptions for a piece of plate, and who, next morning, when the breeze has lulled, and all the sails hang useless in the idle air, shake their despondent heads again, and say, with screwed-up lips, they hope that captain is a sailor, but they shrewdly doubt him. It even became an occupation in the calm, to wonder when the wind would spring up in the favorable quarter, where, it was clearly shown by all the rules and precedents, it ought to have sprung up long ago. The first mate, who whistled for it zealously, was much respected for his perseverance, and was regarded even by the unbelievers as a first-rate sailor. Many gloomy looks would be cast upward through the cabin skylights at the flapping sails while dinner was in progress, and some, growing bold in ruefulness, predicted that we should land about the middle of July. There are always on board ship, a sanguine one, and a despondent one. The latter character carried it hollow at this period of the voyage, and triumphed over the sanguine one at every meal, by inquiring where he supposed the Great Western, which left New York a week after us, was now, and where he supposed the Cunard steam packet was now, and what he thought of sailing vessels, as compared with steamships now, and so beset his life with pestilent attacks of that kind, that he too was obliged to affect despondency, for very peace and quietude. These were additions to the list of entertaining incidents, but there was still another source of interest. We carried in the steerage nearly 100 passengers, a little world of poverty, and as we came to know individuals among them by sight, from looking down upon the deck where they took the air in the daytime, and cooked their food, and very often ate it too, we became curious to know their histories, and with what expectations they had gone out to America, and on what errands they were going home, and what their circumstances were. The information we got on these heads from the carpenter, who had charge of these people, was often of the strangest kind. Some of them had been in America but 3 days, some but 3 months, and some had gone out in the last voyage of that very ship in which they were now returning home. Others had sold their clothes to raise the passage money, and had hardly rags to cover them. Others had no food, and lived upon the charity of the rest, and one man, it was discovered nearly at the end of the voyage, not before, for he kept his secret close, and did not court compassion, had had no sustenance whatever but the bones and scraps of fat he took from the plates used in the after-cabin dinner, when they were put out to be washed. The whole system of shipping and conveying these unfortunate persons, is one that stands in need of thorough revision. If any class deserve to be protected and assisted by the government, it is that class who are banished from their native land in search of the bare means of subsistence. All that could be done for these poor people by the great compassion and humanity of the captain and officers was done, but they require much more. The law is bound, at least upon the English side, to see that too many of them are not put on board one ship, and that their accommodations are decent, not demoralizing, and profligate. It is bound, too, in common humanity, to declare that no man shall be taken on board without his stock of provisions being previously inspected by some proper officer, and pronounced moderately sufficient for his support upon the voyage. It is bound to provide, or to require that there be provided, a medical attendant, whereas in these ships there are none, though sickness of adults, and deaths of children, on the passage, are matters of the very commonest occurrence. Above all, it is the duty of any government, be it monarchy or republic, to interpose and put an end to that system by which a firm of traders in emigrants purchase of the owners the whole 'tween decks of a ship, and send on board as many wretched people as they can lay hold of, on any terms they can get, without the smallest reference to the conveniences of the steerage, the number of berths, the slightest separation of the sexes, or anything but their own immediate profit. Nor is even this the worst of the vicious system, for certain crimping agents of these houses, who have a percentage on all the passengers they inveigle, are constantly traveling about those districts where poverty and discontent are rife, and tempting the credulous into more misery, by holding out monstrous inducements to emigration which can never be realized. The history of every family we had on board was pretty much the same. After hoarding up, and borrowing, and begging, and selling everything to pay the passage, they had gone out to New York, expecting to find its streets paved with gold, and had found them paved with very hard and very real stones. Enterprise was dull, laborers were not wanted, jobs of work were to be got, but the payment was not. They were coming back, even poorer than they went. One of them was carrying an open letter from a young English artisan, who had been in New York a fortnight, to a friend near Manchester, whom he strongly urged to follow him. One of the officers brought it to me as a curiosity. "This is the country, Jem," said the writer. "I like America. There is no despotism here, that's the great thing. Employment of all sorts is going a-begging, and wages are capital. You have only to choose a trade, Jem, and be it. I haven't made choice of one yet, but I shall soon. At present I haven't quite made up my mind whether to be a carpenter, or a tailor." There was yet another kind of passenger, and but one more, who, in the calm and the light winds, was a constant theme of conversation and observation among us. This was an English sailor, a smart, thorough-built, English man-of-war's man from his hat to his shoes, who was serving in the American Navy, and having got leave of absence was on his way home to see his friends. When he presented himself to take and pay for his passage, it had been suggested to him that being an able seaman he might as well work it and save the money, but this piece of advice he very indignantly rejected, saying, he'd be damned, but for once he'd go aboard ship, as a gentleman. Accordingly, they took his money, but he no sooner came aboard, than he stowed his kit in the forecastle, arranged to mess with the crew, and the very first time the hands were turned up, went aloft like a cat, before anybody. And all through the passage there he was, first at the braces, outermost on the yards, perpetually lending a hand everywhere, but always with a sober dignity in his manner, and a sober grin on his face, which plainly said, "I do it as a gentleman. For my own pleasure, mind you." At length and at last, the promised wind came up in right good earnest, and away we went before it, with every stitch of canvas set, slashing through the water nobly. There was a grandeur in the motion of the splendid ship, as overshadowed by her mass of sails, she rode at a furious pace upon the waves, which filled one with an indescribable sense of pride and exultation. As she plunged into a foaming valley, how I loved to see the green waves, bordered deep with white, come rushing on astern, to buoy her upward at their pleasure, and curl about her as she stooped again, but always own her for their haughty mistress still. On we flew, with changing lights upon the water, being now in the blessed region of fleecy skies, a bright sun lighting us by day, and a bright moon by night, the vane pointing directly homeward, alike the truthful index to the favoring wind and to our cheerful hearts, until at sunrise, one fair Monday morning, the 27th of June, I shall not easily forget the day, there lay before us, old Cape Clear, God bless it, showing, in the mist of early morning, like a cloud, the brightest and most welcome cloud, to us, that ever hid the face of heaven's fallen sister, home. Dim speck as it was in the wide prospect, it made the sunrise a more cheerful sight, and gave to it that sort of human interest which it seems to want at sea. There, as elsewhere, the return of day is inseparable from some sense of renewed hope and gladness, but the light shining on the dreary waste of water, and showing it in all its vast extent of loneliness, presents a solemn spectacle, which even night, veiling it in darkness and uncertainty, does not surpass. The rising of the moon is more in keeping with the solitary ocean, and has an air of melancholy grandeur, which in its soft and gentle influence, seems to comfort while it saddens. I recollect when I was a very young child having a fancy that the reflection of the moon in water was a path to heaven, trodden by the spirits of good people on their way to God, and this old feeling often came over me again, when I watched it on a tranquil night at sea. The wind was very light on this same Monday morning, but it was still in the right quarter, and so, by slow degrees, we left Cape Clear behind, and sailed along within sight of the coast of Ireland. And how merry we all were, and how loyal to the George Washington, and how full of mutual congratulations, and how venturesome in predicting the exact hour at which we should arrive at Liverpool, may be easily imagined and readily understood. Also, how heartily we drank the captain's health that day at dinner, and how restless we became about packing up, and how 2 or 3 of the most sanguine spirits rejected the idea of going to bed at all that night as something it was not worth while to do, so near the shore, but went nevertheless, and slept soundly, and how to be so near our journey's end, was like a pleasant dream, from which one feared to wake. The friendly breeze freshened again next day, and on we went once more before it gallantly, descrying now and then an English ship going homeward under shortened sail, while we, with every inch of canvas crowded on, dashed gaily past, and left her far behind. Towards evening, the weather turned hazy, with a drizzling rain, and soon became so thick, that we sailed, as it were, in a cloud. Still we swept onward like a phantom ship, and many an eager eye glanced up to where the lookout on the mast kept watch for Holyhead. At length his long-expected cry was heard, and at the same moment there shone out from the haze and mist ahead, a gleaming light, which presently was gone, and soon returned, and soon was gone again. Whenever it came back, the eyes of all on board brightened and sparkled like itself, and there we all stood, watching this revolving light upon the rock at Holyhead, and praising it for its brightness and its friendly warning, and lauding it, in short, above all other signal lights that ever were displayed, until it once more glimmered faintly in the distance, far behind us. Then, it was time to fire a gun, for a pilot, and almost before its smoke had cleared away, a little boat with a light at her masthead came bearing down upon us, through the darkness, swiftly. And presently, our sails being backed, she ran alongside, and the horse pilot, wrapped and muffled in peacoats and shawls to the very bridge of his weather-ploughed-up nose, stood bodily among us on the deck. And I think if that pilot had wanted to borrow £50 for an indefinite period on no security, we should have engaged to lend it to him, among us, before his boat had dropped astern, or, which is the same thing, before every scrap of news in the paper he brought with him had become the common property of all on board. We turned in pretty late that night, and turned out pretty early next morning. By 6 o'clock we clustered on the deck, prepared to go ashore, and looked upon the spires, and roofs, and smoke, of Liverpool. By 8 we all sat down in one of its hotels, to eat and drink together for the last time. And by 9 we had shaken hands all round, and broken up our social company forever. The country, by the railroad, seemed, as we rattled through it, like a luxuriant garden. The beauty of the fields, so small they looked, the hedgerows, and the trees, the pretty cottages, the beds of flowers, the old churchyards, the antique houses, and every well-known object, the exquisite delights of that one journey, crowding in the short compass of a summer's day, the joy of many years, with the winding up with home and all that makes it dear, no tongue can tell, or pen of mine describe. Chapter 17 Slavery. The upholders of slavery in America, of the atrocities of which system, I shall not write one word for which I have not had ample proof and warrant, may be divided into three great classes. The first are those more moderate and rational owners of human cattle, who have come into the possession of them as so many coins in their trading capital, but who admit the frightful nature of the institution in the abstract, and perceive the dangers to society with which it is fraught, dangers which however distant they may be, or howsoever tardy in their coming on, are as certain to fall upon its guilty head, as is the day of judgment. The second consists of all those owners, breeders, users, buyers and sellers of slaves, who will, until the bloody chapter has a bloody end, own, breed, use, buy, and sell them at all hazards, who doggedly deny the horrors of the system in the teeth of such a mass of evidence as never was brought to bear on any other subject, and to which the experience of every day contributes its immense amount, who would at this or any other moment gladly involve America in a war, civil or foreign, provided that it had for its sole end and object the assertion of their right to perpetuate slavery, and to whip and work and torture slaves, unquestioned by any human authority, and unassailed by any human power, who, when they speak of freedom, mean the freedom to oppress their kind, and to be savage, merciless, and cruel, and of whom every man on his own ground, in Republican America, is a more exacting, and a sterner, and a less responsible despot than the Caliph Harun al-Rashid in his angry robe of scarlet. The third, and not the least numerous or influential, is composed of all that delicate gentility which cannot bear a superior, and cannot brook an equal, of that class whose republicanism means, I will not tolerate a man above me, and of those below, none must approach too near, whose pride, in a land where voluntary servitude is shunned as a disgrace, must be ministered to by slaves, and whose inalienable rights can only have their growth in Negro wrongs. It has been sometimes urged that, in the unavailing efforts which have been made to advance the cause of human freedom in the Republic of America, strange cause for history to treat of, sufficient regard has not been had to the existence of the first class of persons, and it has been contended that they are hardly used, in being confounded with the second. This is, no doubt, the case. Noble instances of pecuniary and personal sacrifice have already had their growth among them, and it is much to be regretted that the gulf between them and the advocates of emancipation should have been widened and deepened by any means, the rather, as there are, beyond dispute, among these slave owners, many kind masters who are tender in the exercise of their unnatural power. Still, it is to be feared that this injustice is inseparable from the state of things with which humanity and truth are called upon to deal. Slavery is not a whit the more endurable because some hearts are to be found which can partially resist its hardening influences, nor can the indignant tide of honest wrath stand still, because in its onward course it overwhelms a few who are comparatively innocent, among a host of guilty. The ground most commonly taken by these better men among the advocates of slavery, is this: it is a bad system, and for myself I would willingly get rid of it, if I could, most willingly. But it is not so bad, as you in England take it to be. You are deceived by the representations of the emancipationists. The greater part of my slaves are much attached to me. You will say that I do not allow them to be severely treated, but I will put it to you whether you believe that it can be a general practice to treat them inhumanly, when it would impair their value, and would be obviously against the interests of their masters. Is it the interest of any man to steal, to game, to waste his health and mental faculties by drunkenness, to lie, forswear himself, indulge hatred, seek desperate revenge, or do murder? No. All these are roads to ruin. And why? then, do men tread them. Because such inclinations are among the vicious qualities of mankind. Blot out, ye friends of slavery, from the catalogue of human passions, brutal lust, cruelty, and the abuse of irresponsible power, of all earthly temptations the most difficult to be resisted, and when ye have done so, and not before, we will inquire whether it be the interest of a master to lash and maim the slaves, over whose lives and limbs he has an absolute control. But again, this class, together with that last one I have named, the miserable aristocracy spawned of a false republic, lift up their voices and exclaim, public opinion is all sufficient to prevent such cruelty as you denounce. Public opinion. Why, public opinion in the slave states is slavery, is it not? Public opinion, in the slave states, has delivered the slaves over to the gentle mercies of their masters. Public opinion has made the laws, and denied the slaves legislative protection. Public opinion has knotted the lash, heated the branding iron, loaded the rifle, and shielded the murderer. Public opinion threatens the abolitionist with death, if he venture to the South, and drags him with a rope about his middle, in broad unblushing noon, through the first city in the East. Public opinion has, within a few years, burned a slave alive at a slow fire in the city of St. Louis, and public opinion has to this day maintained upon the bench that estimable judge who charged the jury, impaneled there to try his murderers, that their most horrid deed was an act of public opinion, and being so, must not be punished by the laws the public sentiment had made. Public opinion hailed this doctrine with a howl of wild applause, and set the prisoners free, to walk the city, men of mark, and influence, and station, as they had been before. Public opinion. What class of men have an immense preponderance over the rest of the community, in their power of representing public opinion in the legislature? The slave owners. They send from their 12 states 100 members, while the 14 free states, with a free population nearly double, return but 142. Before whom do the presidential candidates bow down the most humbly, on whom do they fawn the most fondly, and for whose tastes do they cater the most assiduously in their servile protestations? The slave owners always. Public opinion. Hear the public opinion of the Free South, as expressed by its own members in the House of Representatives at Washington. I have a great respect for the chair, quoth North Carolina. I have a great respect for the chair as an officer of the House, and a great respect for him personally. Nothing but that respect prevents me from rushing to the table and tearing that petition which has just been presented for the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia, to pieces. I warn the abolitionists, says South Carolina, ignorant, infuriated barbarians as they are, that if chance shall throw any of them into our hands, he may expect a felon's death. Let an abolitionist come within the borders of South Carolina, cries a third, mild Carolina's colleague, and if we can catch him, we will try him, and notwithstanding the interference of all the governments on earth, including the federal government, we will hang him. Public opinion has made this law. It has declared that in Washington, in that city which takes its name from the father of American liberty, any justice of the peace may bind with fetters any Negro passing down the street and thrust him into jail. No offense on the black man's part is necessary. The justice says, I choose to think this man a runaway, and locks him up. Public opinion empowers the man of law when this is done, to advertise the Negro in the newspapers, warning his owner to come and claim him, or he will be sold to pay the jail fees. But supposing he is a free black, and has no owner, it may naturally be presumed that he is set at liberty. No, he is sold to recompense his jailer. This has been done again, and again, and again. He has no means of proving his freedom, has no adviser, messenger, or assistance of any sort or kind, no investigation into his case is made, or inquiry instituted. He, a free man, who may have served for years, and bought his liberty, is thrown into jail on no process, for no crime, and on no pretense of crime, and is sold to pay the jail fees. This seems incredible, even of America, but it is the law. Public opinion is deferred to, in such cases as the following, which is headed in the newspapers, Interesting Law Case. An interesting case is now on trial in the Supreme Court, arising out of the following facts. A gentleman residing in Maryland had allowed an aged pair of his slaves, substantial though not legal freedom for several years. While thus living, a daughter was born to them, who grew up in the same liberty, until she married a free Negro, and went with him to reside in Pennsylvania. They had several children, and lived unmolested until the original owner died, when his heir attempted to regain them, but the magistrate before whom they were brought, decided that he had no jurisdiction in the case. The owner seized the woman and her children in the night, and carried them to Maryland. Cash for Negroes, cash for Negroes, cash for Negroes is the heading of advertisements in great capitals down the long columns of the crowded journals. Woodcuts of a runaway Negro with manacled hands, crouching beneath a bluff pursuer in top boots, who, having caught him, grasps him by the throat, agreeably diversify the pleasant text. The leading article protests against that abominable and hellish doctrine of abolition, which is repugnant alike to every law of God and nature. The delicate mamma, who smiles her acquiescence in this sprightly writing as she reads the paper in her cool piazza, quiets her youngest child who clings about her skirts, by promising the boy a whip to beat the little niggers with. But the Negroes, little and big, are protected by public opinion. Let us try this public opinion by another test, which is important in 3 points of view. First, as showing how desperately timid of the public opinion slave owners are, in their delicate descriptions of fugitive slaves in widely circulated newspapers. Secondly, as showing how perfectly contented the slaves are, and how very seldom they run away. Thirdly, as exhibiting their entire freedom from scar, or blemish, or any mark of cruel infliction, as their pictures are drawn, not by lying abolitionists, but by their own truthful masters. The following are a few specimens of the advertisements in the public papers. It is only 4 years since the oldest among them appeared, and others of the same nature continue to be published every day, in shoals. Ran away, Negress Caroline. Had on a collar with one prong turned down. Ran away, a black woman, Betsy. Had an iron bar on her right leg. Ran away, the Negro Manuel. Much marked with irons. Ran away, the Negress Fanny. Had on an iron band about her neck. Ran away, a Negro boy about 12 years old. Had round his neck a chain dog collar with de Lampert engraved on it. Ran away, the Negro hound. Has a ring of iron on his left foot. Also, Grise, his wife, having a ring and chain on the left leg. Ran away, a Negro boy named James. Said boy was ironed when he left me. Committed to jail, a man who calls his name John. He has a clog of iron on his right foot which will weigh 4 or 5 pounds. Detained at the police jail, the Negro wench, Myra. Has several marks of lashing, and has irons on her feet. Ran away, a Negro woman and 2 children. A few days before she went off, I burnt her with a hot iron, on the left side of her face. I tried to make the letter M. Ran away, a Negro man named Henry, his left eye out, some scars from a dirk on and under his left arm, and much scarred with the whip. $100 reward, for a Negro fellow, Pompey, 40 years old. He is branded on the left jaw. Committed to jail, a Negro man. Has no toes on the left foot. Ran away, a Negro woman named Rachel. Has lost all her toes except the large one. Ran away, Sam. He was shot a short time since through the hand, and has several shots in his left arm and side. Ran away, my Negro man Dennis. Said Negro has been shot in the left arm between the shoulder and elbow, which has paralyzed the left hand. Ran away, my Negro man named Simon. He has been shot badly, in his back and right arm. Ran away, a Negro named Arthur. Has a considerable scar across his breast and each arm, made by a knife, loves to talk much of the goodness of God. $25 reward for my man Isaac. He has a scar on his forehead, caused by a blow, and one on his back, made by a shot from a pistol. Ran away, a Negro girl called Mary. Has a small scar over her eye, a good many teeth missing, the letter A is branded on her cheek and forehead. Ran away, Negro Ben. Has a scar on his right hand, his thumb and forefinger being injured by being shot last fall. A part of the bone came out. He has also 1 or 2 large scars on his back and hips. Detained at the jail, a mulatto, named Tom. Has a scar on the right cheek, and appears to have been burned with powder on the face. Ran away, a Negro man named Ned. 3 of his fingers are drawn into the palm of his hand by a cut. Has a scar on the back of his neck, nearly half round, done by a knife. Was committed to jail, a Negro man. Says his name is Josiah. His back very much scarred by the whip, and branded on the thigh and hips in 3 or 4 places, thus, J.M. The rim of his right ear has been bit or cut off. $50 reward, for my fellow Edward. He has a scar on the corner of his mouth, 2 cuts on and under his arm, and the letter E on his arm. Ran away, Negro boy Ellie. Has a scar on one of his arms from the bite of a dog. Ran away, from the plantation of James Surgett. The following Negroes: Randall, has one ear cropped. Bob, has lost one eye. Kentucky Tom, has one jaw broken. Ran away, Anthony. One of his ears cut off, and his left hand cut with an axe. $50 reward for the Negro Jim Blake. Has a piece cut out of each ear, and the middle finger of the left hand cut off to the second joint. Ran away, a Negro woman named Maria. Has a scar on one side of her cheek, by a cut. Some scars on her back. Ran away, the mulatto wench Mary. Has a cut on the left arm, a scar on the left shoulder, and 2 upper teeth missing. I should say, perhaps, in explanation of this latter piece of description, that among the other blessings which public opinion secures to the Negroes, is the common practice of violently punching out their teeth. To make them wear iron collars by day and night, and to worry them with dogs, are practices almost too ordinary to deserve mention. Ran away, my man Fountain. Has holes in his ears, a scar on the right side of his forehead, has been shot in the hind part of his legs, and is marked on the back with the whip. $250 reward for my Negro man Jim. He is much marked with shot in his right thigh. The shot entered on the outside, halfway between the hip and knee joints. Brought to jail, John. Left ear cropped. Taken up, a Negro man. Is very much scarred about the face and body, and has the left ear bit off. Ran away, a black girl, named Mary. Has a scar on her cheek, and the end of one of her toes cut off. Ran away, my mulatto woman, Judy. She has had her right arm broke. Ran away, my Negro man, Levi. His left hand has been burnt, and I think the end of his forefinger is off. Ran away, a Negro man, named Washington. Has lost a part of his middle finger, and the end of his little finger. $25 reward for my man John. The tip of his nose is bit off. $25 reward for the Negro slave, Sally. Walks as though crippled in the back. Ran away, Joe Dennis. Has a small notch in one of his ears. Ran away, Negro boy, Jack. Has a small crop out of his left ear. Ran away, a Negro man, named Ivory. Has a small piece cut out of the top of each ear. While upon the subject of ears, I may observe that a distinguished abolitionist in New York once received a Negro's ear, which had been cut off close to the head, in a General Post letter. It was forwarded by the free and independent gentleman who had caused it to be amputated, with a polite request that he would place the specimen in his collection. I could enlarge this catalogue with broken arms, and broken legs, and gashed flesh, and missing teeth, and lacerated backs, and bites of dogs, and brands of red-hot irons innumerable. But as my readers will be sufficiently sickened and repelled already, I will turn to another branch of the subject. These advertisements, of which a similar collection might be made for every year, and month, and week, and day, and which are coolly read in families as things of course, and as a part of the current news and small talk, will serve to show how very much the slaves profit by public opinion, and how tender it is in their behalf. But it may be worthwhile to inquire how the slave owners, and the class of society to which great numbers of them belong, defer to public opinion in their conduct, not to their slaves but to each other, how they are accustomed to restrain their passions, what their bearing is among themselves, whether they are fierce or gentle, whether their social customs be brutal, sanguinary, and violent, or bear the impress of civilization and refinement. That we may have no partial evidence from abolitionists in this inquiry, either, I will once more turn to their own newspapers, and I will confine myself, this time, to a selection from paragraphs which appeared from day to day, during my visit to America, and which refer to occurrences happening while I was there. The italics in these extracts, as in the foregoing, are my own. These cases did not all occur, it will be seen, in territory actually belonging to legalized slave states, though most, and those the very worst among them did, as their counterparts constantly do, but the position of the scenes of action in reference to places immediately at hand, where slavery is the law, and the strong resemblance between that class of outrages and the rest, lead to the just presumption that the character of the parties concerned was formed in slave districts, and brutalized by slave customs. Horrible tragedy. By a slip from the Southport Telegraph, Wisconsin, we learn that the Honorable Charles C. P. Arndt, member of the council for Brown County, was shot dead on the floor of the council chamber, by James R. Vineyard, member from Grant County. The affair grew out of a nomination for sheriff of Grant County. Mr. E. S. Baker was nominated and supported by Mr. Arndt. This nomination was opposed by Vineyard, who wanted the appointment to vest in his own brother. In the course of debate, the deceased made some statements which Vineyard pronounced false, and made use of violent and insulting language, dealing largely in personalities, to which Mr. A made no reply. After the adjournment, Mr. A stepped up to Vineyard, and requested him to retract, which he refused to do, repeating the offensive words. Mr. Arndt then made a blow at Vineyard, who stepped back a pace, drew a pistol, and shot him dead. The issue appears to have been provoked on the part of Vineyard, who was determined at all hazards to defeat the appointment of Baker, and who, himself defeated, turned his ire and revenge upon the unfortunate Arndt. The Wisconsin tragedy. Public indignation runs high in the territory of Wisconsin, in relation to the murder of C.C.P. Arndt, in the Legislative Hall of the territory. Meetings have been held in different counties of Wisconsin, denouncing the practice of secretly bearing arms in the legislative chambers of the country. We have seen the account of the expulsion of James R. Vineyard, the perpetrator of the bloody deed, and are amazed to hear, that, after this expulsion by those who saw Vineyard kill Mr. Arndt in the presence of his aged father, who was on a visit to see his son, little dreaming that he was to witness his murder, Judge Dunhurst discharged Vineyard on bail. The Miners' Free Press speaks in terms of merited rebuke at the outrage upon the feelings of the people of Wisconsin. Vineyard was within arm's length of Mr. Arndt, when he took such deadly aim at him, that he never spoke. Vineyard might at pleasure, being so near, have only wounded him, but he chose to kill him. Murder. By a letter in a St. Louis paper of the 40th, we notice a terrible outrage at Burlington, Iowa. A Mr. Brigman having had a difficulty with a citizen of the place, Mr. Ross, a brother-in-law of the latter, provided himself with one of Colt's revolving pistols, met Mr. B in the street, and discharged the contents of 5 of the barrels at him, each shot taking effect. Mr. B, though horribly wounded, and dying, returned the fire, and killed Ross on the spot. Terrible death of Robert Potter. From the Caddo Gazette of the 12th inst., we learn the frightful death of Colonel Robert Potter. He was beset in his house by an enemy, named Rose. He sprang from his couch, seized his gun, and, in his night clothes, rushed from the house. For about 200 yards his speed seemed to defy his pursuers, but, getting entangled in a thicket, he was captured. Rose told him that he intended to act a generous part, and give him a chance for his life. He then told Potter he might run, and he should not be interrupted till he reached a certain distance. Potter started at the word of command, and before a gun was fired he had reached the lake. His first impulse was to jump in the water and dive for it, which he did. Rose was close behind him, and formed his men on the bank ready to shoot him as he rose. In a few seconds he came up to breathe, and scarce had his head reached the surface of the water when it was completely riddled with the shot of their guns, and he sunk, to rise no more. Murder in Arkansas. We understand that a severe rencontre came off a few days since in the Seneca Nation, between Mr. Luce, the sub-agent of the mixed band of the Senecas, Quapaw, and Shawnees, and Mr. James Gillespie, of the mercantile firm of Thomas G. Allison and Company, of Maysville, Benton, County Ark, in which the latter was slain with a bowie knife. Some difficulty had for some time existed between the parties. It is said that Major Gillespie brought on the attack with a cane. A severe conflict ensued, during which 2 pistols were fired by Gillespie and 1 by Luce. Luce then stabbed Gillespie with one of those never-failing weapons, a bowie knife. The death of Major G is much regretted, as he was a liberal-minded and energetic man. Since the above was in type, we have learned that Major Allison has stated to some of our citizens in town that Mr. Luce gave the first blow. We forbear to give any particulars, as the matter will be the subject of judicial investigation. Foul deed. The steamer Thames, just from Missouri River, brought us a handbill, offering a reward of $500, for the person who assassinated Lilburn W. Baggs, late governor of this state, at Independence, on the night of the 6th inst. Governor Baggs, it is stated in a written memorandum, was not dead, but mortally wounded. Since the above was written, we received a note from the Clerk of the Thames, giving the following particulars. Governor Baggs was shot by some villain on Friday, 6th inst., in the evening, while sitting in a room in his own house in Independence. His son, a boy, hearing a report, ran into the room, and found the governor sitting in his chair, with his jaw fallen down, and his head leaning back. On discovering the injury done to his father, he gave the alarm. Foot tracks were found in the garden below the window, and a pistol picked up supposed to have been overloaded, and thrown from the hand of the scoundrel who fired it. 3 buckshots of a heavy load took effect, one going through his mouth, one into the brain, and another probably in or near the brain, all going into the back part of the neck and head. The governor was still alive on the morning of the 7th, but no hopes for his recovery by his friends, and but slight hopes from his physicians. A man was suspected, and the sheriff most probably has possession of him by this time. The pistol was one of a pair stolen some days previous from a baker in Independence, and the legal authorities have the description of the other. Rencontre. An unfortunate affair took place on Friday evening in Chartres Street, in which one of our most respectable citizens received a dangerous wound, from a poignard, in the abdomen. From the B. New Orleans, of yesterday, we learn the following particulars. It appears that an article was published in the French side of the paper on Monday last, containing some strictures on the artillery battalion for firing their guns on Sunday morning, in answer to those from the Ontario and Woodbury, and thereby much alarm was caused to the families of those persons who were out all night preserving the peace of the city. Major C. Gowley, commander of the battalion, resenting this, called at the office and demanded the author's name. That of Mr. P. Arpin was given to him, who was absent at the time. Some angry words then passed with one of the proprietors, and a challenge followed. The friends of both parties tried to arrange the affair, but failed to do so. On Friday evening, about 7 o'clock, Major Gowley met Mr. P. Arpin in Chartres Street, and accosted him. "Are you Mr. Arpin?" "Yes, sir." "Then I have to tell you that you are applying an appropriate epithet. I shall remind you of your words, sir. But I have said I would break my cane on your shoulders. I know it, but I have not yet received the blow." At these words, Major Gowley, having a cane in his hands, struck Mr. Arpin across the face, and the latter drew a poignard from his pocket and stabbed Major Gowley in the abdomen. Fears are entertained that the wound will be mortal. We understand that Mr. Arpin has given security for his appearance at the criminal court to answer the charge. Affray in Mississippi. On the 27th ult., in an affray near Carthage, Leake County, Mississippi, between James Cottingham and John Wilburn, the latter was shot by the former, and so horribly wounded, that there was no hope of his recovery. On the 2nd instant, there was an affray at Carthage between A.C. Sharkey and George Gorff, in which the latter was shot, and thought mortally wounded. Sharkey delivered himself up to the authorities, but changed his mind and escaped. Personal encounter. An encounter took place in Sparta, a few days since, between the barkeeper of an hotel and a man named Berry. It appears that Berry had become somewhat noisy, and that the barkeeper, determined to preserve order, had threatened to shoot Berry, whereupon Berry drew a pistol and shot the barkeeper down. He was not dead at the last accounts, but slight hopes were entertained of his recovery. Duel. The clerk of the Steamboat Tribune informs us that another duel was fought on Tuesday last, by Mr. Robbins, a bank officer in Vicksburg, and Mr. Fall, the editor of the Vicksburg Sentinel. According to the arrangement, the parties had 6 pistols each, which, after the word fire, they were to discharge as fast as they pleased. Fall fired 2 pistols without effect. Mr. Robbins' first shot took effect in Fall's thigh, who fell, and was unable to continue the combat. A fray in Clark County. An unfortunate affray occurred in Clark County, Mo., near Waterloo, on Tuesday the 19th ult., which originated in settling the partnership concerns of Messrs. M. Kane and M. Allister, who had been engaged in the business of distilling, and resulted in the death of the latter, who was shot down by Mr. M. Kane, because of his attempting to take possession of 7 barrels of whiskey, the property of M. Kane, which had been knocked off to M. Allister at a sheriff's sale at $1 per barrel. M. Kane immediately fled and at the latest dates had not been taken. This unfortunate affray caused considerable excitement in the neighborhood, as both the parties were men with large families depending upon them and stood well in the community. I will quote but one more paragraph, which, by reason of its monstrous absurdity, may be a relief to these atrocious deeds. Affair of Honor. We have just heard the particulars of a meeting which took place on 6 Mile Island, on Tuesday, between 2 young bloods of our city, Samuel Thurston, aged 15, and William Hine, aged 13 years. They were attended by young gentlemen of the same age. The weapons used on the occasion were a couple of Dickens's best rifles, the distance, 30 yards. They took one fire, without any damage being sustained by either party, except the ball of Thurston's gun passing through the crown of Hine's hat. Through the intercession of the Board of Honor, the challenge was withdrawn, and the difference amicably adjusted. If the reader will picture to himself the kind of Board of Honor which amicably adjusted the difference between these 2 little boys, who in any other part of the world would have been amicably adjusted on 2 porters' backs and soundly flogged with birchen rods, he will be possessed, no doubt, with as strong a sense of its ludicrous character, as that which sets me laughing whenever its image rises up before me. Now, I appeal to every human mind, imbued with the commonest of common sense, and the commonest of common humanity, to all dispassionate, reasoning creatures, of any shade of opinion, and ask, with these revolting evidences of the state of society which exists in and about the slave districts of America before them, can they have a doubt of the real condition of the slave, or can they for a moment make a compromise between the institution or any of its flagrant, fearful features, and their own just consciences? Will they say of any tale of cruelty and horror, however aggravated in degree, that it is improbable, when they can turn to the public prints, and, running, read such signs as these, laid before them by the men who rule the slaves, in their own acts and under their own hands? Do we not know that the worst deformity and ugliness of slavery are at once the cause and the effect of the reckless license taken by these freeborn outlaws? Do we not know that the man who has been born and bred among its wrongs, who has seen in his childhood husbands obliged at the word of command to flog their wives, women, indecently compelled to hold up their own garments that men might lay the heavier stripes upon their legs, driven and harried by brutal overseers in their time of travail, and becoming mothers on the field of toil, under the very lash itself, who has read in youth, and seen his virgin sisters read, descriptions of runaway men and women, and their disfigured persons, which could not be published elsewhere, of so much stock upon a farm, or at a show of beasts? Do we not know that that man, whenever his wrath is kindled up, will be a brutal savage? Do we not know that as he is a coward in his domestic life, stalking among his shrinking men and women slaves armed with his heavy whip, so he will be a coward out of doors, and carrying cowards' weapons hidden in his breast, will shoot men down and stab them when he quarrels? And if our reason did not teach us this and much beyond, if we were such idiots as to close our eyes to that fine mode of training which rears up such men, should we not know that they who among their equals stab and pistol in the legislative halls, and in the counting-house, and on the market-place, and in all the elsewhere peaceful pursuits of life, must be to their dependents, even though they were free servants, so many merciless and unrelenting tyrants? What shall we declaim against the ignorant peasantry of Ireland, and mince the matter when these American taskmasters are in question? Shall we cry shame on the brutality of those who hamstring cattle, and spare the lights of freedom upon earth, who notch the ears of men and women, cut pleasant poses in the shrinking flesh, learn to write with pens of red-hot iron on the human face, rack their poetic fancies for liveries of mutilation which their slaves shall wear for life and carry to the grave, breaking living limbs as did the soldiery who mocked and slew the Saviour of the world, and set defenseless creatures up for targets? Shall we whimper over legends of the tortures practiced on each other by the pagan Indians, and smile upon the cruelties of Christian men? Shall we, so long as these things last, exult above the scattered remnants of that race, and triumph in the white enjoyment of their possessions? Rather, for me, restore the forest and the Indian village. In lieu of stars and stripes, let some poor feather flutter in the breeze, replace the streets and squares by wigwams, and though the death song of 100 haughty warriors fill the air, it will be music to the shriek of one unhappy slave. On one theme, which is commonly before our eyes, and in respect of which our national character is changing fast, let the plain truth be spoken, and let us not, like dastards, beat about the bush by hinting at the Spaniard and the fierce Italian. When knives are drawn by Englishmen in conflict, let it be said and known, we owe this change to republican slavery. These are the weapons of freedom. With sharp points and edges such as these, liberty in America hews and hacks her slaves, or, failing that pursuit, her sons devote them to a better use, and turn them on each other. Chapter 18 Concluding remarks. There are many passages in this book, where I have been at some pains to resist the temptation of troubling my readers with my own deductions and conclusions, preferring that they should judge for themselves, from such premises as I have laid before them. My only object in the outset was to carry them with me faithfully wheresoever I went, and that task I have discharged. But I may be pardoned, if on such a theme as the general character of the American people, and the general character of their social system, as presented to a stranger's eyes, I desire to express my own opinions in a few words, before I bring these volumes to a close. They are, by nature, frank, brave, cordial, hospitable, and affectionate. Cultivation and refinement seem but to enhance their warmth of heart and ardent enthusiasm, and it is the possession of these latter qualities in a most remarkable degree, which renders an educated American one of the most endearing and most generous of friends. I never was so won upon, as by this class, never yielded up my full confidence and esteem so readily and pleasurably, as to them, never can make again, in half a year, so many friends for whom I seem to entertain the regard of half a life. These qualities are natural, I implicitly believe, to the whole people. That they are, however, sadly sapped and blighted in their growth among the mass, and that there are influences at work which endanger them still more, and give but little present promise of their healthy restoration, is a truth that ought to be told. It is an essential part of every national character to pique itself mightily upon its faults, and to deduce tokens of its virtue or its wisdom from their very exaggeration. One great blemish in the popular mind of America, and the prolific parent of an innumerable brood of evils, is universal distrust. Yet the American citizen plumes himself upon this spirit, even when he is sufficiently dispassionate to perceive it works,